Today's event is the Mary Dolbashian Davidian Armenian Genocide Education Lecture. I have to introduce Mary Dolbashian Davidian to you. Mary was born in 1929 in Providence, Rhode Island, to Bagdasar and Khatun Dolbashian. Both of Dolbashian's parents were from Palu, Turkey. Bagdasar, like many other Armenian men, came to the United States before the genocide, hoping to make enough money to get his family out. His future wife, Khatun, survived the deportation march to Syria. She met and married Bagdasar after the genocide. Mary, their daughter, graduated Providence High School, and at the age of 24, married David B. Davidian. The young couple moved to Worcester, Mass. By 1959, they had 3 children. One of those children was Christine. So I'd like to switch perspectives now and tell Mary's story through the eyes of Christine. Christine's mother died of cancer when Christine was very young, leaving Christine with hardly any firsthand memories of her mother. Christine's father remarried shortly after her mother's death. Christine and her siblings were forbidden from talking about their mother. As a result, it was only later in life that Christine discovered who her mother was. She was a writer, a journalist, and a poet. Much of her work appeared in Armenian Weekly. Christine's cousins said of their aunt, Christine's mother, that she was a kind and gentle soul. So Mary Dolbashian's life, which was interrupted much too soon by cancer, reverberates in ways that she could never have anticipated. In addition to this named lecture and endowment, there is a brick that honors her in the Memorial Grove on the backside of campus. We will very soon have one of her poems up on our website. Christine writes, "It is the least that I can do for her, to be a model daughter for Armenian genocide education." In that regard, you have most certainly succeeded, and we are the beneficiaries of that. Okay, so today we have 2 panelists in dialogue. So sitting closest to me is my friend Dzovinar Derderian. I met Dzovinar several years ago at the Russian History Workshop at UC Berkeley. She is assistant adjunct professor and the executive director of the Armenian Studies program at UC Berkeley. She holds a PhD from the University of Michigan, where we studied with Ron Suni, who has spoken in this lecture series. We sometimes say that historians of Armenia, like the history of the Armenian people, tilt in one of 3 directions: toward Russia and the Soviet Union, toward Persia and Iran, or toward the Ottoman Empire and the Turkish Republic. Dzovinar falls into the latter camp. Her work investigates the ways that provincial Armenians navigated the multi-ethnic and multi-confessional milieus in which they lived. She is the co-editor of the book, The Ottoman East in the 19th Century, Societies, Identities, and Politics. And as I've just learned, she's busy finishing up her own monograph. So our second panelist is the filmmaker, Sareen Hairabedian. Sareen is an Armenian Jordanian documentary filmmaker based here in the United States. Through her intimate observational filming style, she captures the untold stories of the underrepresented. Hairabedian's directorial debut, We Are Not Done Yet, is a 40-minute HBO documentary about U.S. veterans grappling with PTSD who use poetry to heal. It was acclaimed Best Documentary at the GI Film Festival and was nominated for Best Documentary Short at the IDA Awards in 2018. What you have watched, My Sweet Lamb, is her debut feature-length documentary featuring one child's journey through disillusionment, trauma, and hope. The film is supported by ITVS, ARTA, ARTE, AFAC, IDA, and others. Sareen was a 2023 fellow at the Video Consortium Doc New York City, and Creative Armenia. We're so pleased to have you both here. So the way this is going to work is there's going to be a moderated dialogue between the two of them for about 30 minutes, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience.
Great. Thank you very much, Stephen. And thank you for inviting us both. Thank you, Sareen, for being here. It's a pleasure to meet you after one academic year. It's been, I think. It was wonderful to watch the film, My Sweet Land, once again. It's both moving, funny, and tragic. And it really brings something deeply about the consequences of war on children that I think is particularly important in the moment that we live, as many children are affected by wars. So I wanted to start asking you about the very first scene of the movie, the mass wedding scene. If you can give some context into that event and why it's at the beginning of the film.
Great. Thank you, Dzovinar. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for inviting me. It's really an honor to speak to you all and to have this conversation together. Apologies, my voice is a little funky, but I'm sure you're going to all hear me pretty well. So the mass wedding of the film, it was actually the starting point of how I wanted to make this film. I stumbled upon this image that had 800 couples in Artsakh getting married all on the same day back in 2008. Before all that, I knew I always wanted to make a story about this region, about Artsakh, because I'm Armenian. I grew up in Jordan in the diaspora, but I very much knew about the Artsakh struggle, the story, the history that the Armenians of Artsakh were going through with this war that was just as a cloud on their lives, on their livelihood. And when I stumbled upon this image, it was such a positive, joyful image that was very different from every other image I knew about this region, which was always militarized, families, tanks, men in their military uniforms. So to see an image of white pride coming from that region intrigued me. And from there, I knew I wanted to tell the story of the new generation of Artsakh. Who are the kids that are growing up in this region that have no choice but to serve for the future, for the safety of this place, and a natural way. Maybe I should talk with this. 1, 2, 3. Can you hear me? 1. Yeah. So a natural way was to go and meet families and children that were born from that mass wedding. And in 2018, which was 10 years after that 2008 wedding, I went there. I met a fixer locally in Artsakh who basically knew all the different regions in the country and introduced me to different village chiefs who knew of these people that were getting married, that got married in 2008. And through this very analog list of people, I went and met with different families, and around 22 families that I met with, and Village's family was one. So I just slowly decided that it would be through the perspective of this child, that I tell the story.
Mm-hmm. So your initial goal was not necessarily to tell when you went to Artsakh, it wasn't. So maybe you can tell us why you went there changed over the course of the filming.
Yeah. So as I said about my background, I knew I wanted to tell a story about this region. And right after finishing my HBO film, We Are Not Done Yet, which talks about veterans who go to war, come back, traumatized, they use art and poetry to heal. Inside me as an Armenian, I questioned what kind of lives do these children live in this region where they're destined to become soldiers. It's not a choice, it's just their future. And me also knowing about this region and kind of this militarized brushstroke that it's always presented as, that mass wedding gave me a very interesting, different angle to access this region through this celebration, celebration that also has this underlying goal and mission of just raising a generation that will have to serve, because that's the reality growing up in such a place. So I went, obviously at that point when I went in 2018, there was no active war. It's been under a long, more stable, but a lot of border issues. But as a whole, the country was not in active war. So when I went, I wanted to just watch how these children are growing in a place where war can erupt at any moment. And just see their spaces, watch their schools, their curricula, their, what happens in their neighborhoods, what they talk about at homes, around tables, not knowing that 2 years later, war was going to erupt. So a lot changed. My goal at first was just to observe and to tell a story in a very, without big dramatic instances or events. And while I was there, and once I met Barej and created this great relationship with him and his family, 2 years later, the war erupted. And by then, I already had a really great access and a really great relationship with them, where they just simply welcomed me to come back and come back and come back and document them, their most vulnerable and most tragic days. So as a start, the vision was to tell the story of Artsakh. I think it continues to be so. I continue to tell that, but in a more urgent and I think in a humane way, because what we saw was something I was not expecting to happen under my lens.
Right. So the depopulation of Artsakh. Okay, sure. Was of course unexpected for everybody involved. And what I appreciate about this film is that the very humane story of it, because I think we often talk about Artsakh in its geopolitical and political aspect, much less in the human experience of the region. One I guess a technical question that I got very curious about is to give context. The dialect of Artsakh is very different from the dialect that's spoken in contemporary Armenia, and even more different from the Western Armenian that you speak. So how did you cross that language barrier with the local Artsakhites?
Yeah, at the very beginning when I went, the Artsakhi dialect was very foreign to me. But I also speak Arabic, and the Artsakhites have influences. They use a lot of Turkish words, and in some ways, if I just stopped and took everything in, I took a second to think, I could find the Turkish roots in the Arabic roots in certain words, and just make these connections. And a lot of them made sense to me. And I would even talk to the family and say, "You just say taht. Taht is bed in Arabic." He's like, "Yeah, we say taht because it's a connection of what they had." I think in Turkish it has a root of that as well. So I think that to me and my exposure to these different languages, the Armenian, the Eastern, the Western, and the Arabic, slowly I started to grasp and get used to their language. And I think over the years, the more I spent time with them, the more I reviewed the footage that I shot and listened and listened. I mean, I shot around 500 hours of footage, and we went through most of the footage at different phases during editing. So my ear got really used to it, so I could practice and understand more whenever I'm with them again. And yeah, it wasn't a problem, I think, after maybe 2 years of into the process.
Okay, thank you. So the other question I have in connection with this human versus political and geopolitical story is that we do see scenes in the film where the children are asked what is their fatherland or their homeland. And they, especially in the camp, they're saying things that they have memorized, sort of, right? But there is things, and maybe I'm asking you to reflect on this, seems a relationship with the land that is perhaps more difficult for us who live in very urbanized settings, in settings where we're not, our ancestors are not of the land that we live on. Perhaps it's different to understand this relationship with the land. When we see Rej, the main character, right, of the film, so naturally interacting with land and growing up with the knowledge, because they are cultivators of the land, and they live so close with the animals that feed them. So I was wondering if you can reflect on this, of what you learned through the process of the relationship with lands that's not necessarily political, but individual. Yeah.
Thank you. That's such a beautiful question. And I think that's also where the title of the film comes from, My Sweet Land. I think it's something I learned as I lived with them, beyond just, documenting them and being a documentary filmmaker, trying to tell their story. I think I learned what it means to love a place and to love a home and to call it a home, because of this direct connection that they had with, one, cultivating the land, but also with everything that they have sacrificed for the land, in the land. Vareja's grandmother's brother, their relatives, their neighbors, they've all lost their lives for the land. They're buried in the land. So, and they're buried next door to them, So there's this notion of even the dead are in this land that we cultivate and that we get life. And this cycle is so apparent, and it's so tangible. It's something, it feels very abstract if you talk about it, but when you're in their homes, smelling and eating the food and seeing the pride and the joy that they have just by existing on this place that they've put so much love into, over centuries, is just a pure definition of this, from a human and from a survival perspective and not a political one. And when they were uprooted, I mean, if any one of you talks to Vareja's family now, it feels like a big part of their being is just ripped out. They're not the same people. They're not this. There's not that light in their eyes. There's not that hope and lightness that they had back in Artsakh. That does not exist anymore. And a big part of it is because they've been ripped out of that place that they've basically lived and died for. And yeah, I mean, it's as basic as their food, it sounds very poetic, but it's their daily food, their daily meals were all coming from the gardens, from the neighbors, the honey that they've that they have the honey, the bees that they keep, and the cows and the pigs, and so it's just their daily life. It's what they know, and I think if that was taken away from them, then a big part of their life is it feels stolen from them.
Yeah, in so many ways we see that their livelihood is so directly connected to land in ways that ours living here are so far removed, right?
And I want to add
Sure.
something. I just want to add something is why the reason I think that I felt that myself with them is because I myself had questions about my ancestors who had been uprooted from their own lands during the Armenian genocide, and they moved from one place to another in the Middle East until I was born in Jordan. So the question of home and the question of what a homeland is has always been a big question mark for me. And the way I do my work is always a form of exploration to find some sort of answers or belonging. And I feel like by documenting Village's family and their relationship with their land gave me some answers about what my ancestors had in their homelands.
Great. Thank you very much. I guess I wanted to ask a few questions. Well, I wanted to ask if Brej has seen the film, and also about where Brej is and what he's doing now.
So Varej and his family were actually my very first audience after I was done editing the film. I wanted them to see it. I wanted to get their blessing before going into the world with the film. So he saw the film while he was in displacement in Armenia after the ethnic cleansing of Artsakh. And he feels extremely proud about it. I think his whole family feels like this is just a golden piece of archival material that exists of their home that no longer is, that none of us have access to anymore. And I took him to one big film festival in France. And one thing I can say that he probably wants every audience member to know is he always says, this is not only my story, this is the story of every boy, every girl that grew up in this region that's of my age. This is their hopes, their dreams that have been really shut, that have been affected by this conflict. So he has a great sense of pride. And right now he's learning to become a dentist in a pre-college program in Yerevan, in the city, in the capital of Armenia. And I think he also has a certain relationship with the film where he's holding himself accountable because he promised himself in the film, that it was captured, there are thousands of witnesses now all around the world that know he's going to become a dentist or a real dentist. So he's on that route, He wants to do it, and his family recently moved to the north part of Armenia, Banazor. So he's 2 or 3 hours away from them in the city, going to college, living on his own, and just continuing to make this happen.
Thank you. So I guess the next question I want to ask is a little bit of the experience I had with the film in the beginning. As people may know, when we first tried to show the film at UC Berkeley, there was a lot of resistance by representatives of the Azerbaijani government, and the film was initially cancelled, and we planned for a few months later when we began the semester. And I know it's not the first time at the Berkeley was not the first time that the film got was subjected to censorship, basically. And I wanted to ask you if you can. The film has been very successful and is now on PBS, so we know it's successful. But I wanted to talk for you to talk about the resistance that it has seen, the attempts of censorship, and the work that has been done on your part.
Yeah. Yeah, I think going into this film and making this film, I was expecting some sort of pushback, maybe in film festivals or so, but what we experienced was a bit larger. I think the process of making the film was we had a lot of hurdles because of the geopolitical changes, but then the distribution of the film was also another phase of a lot of hardships. But basically the film was Jordan's, so the film is a co-production between Jordan, the US, Ireland, and France, which means all these 4 countries put funds to make this film possible, to bring it to life. And Jordan submitted the film as its Oscar entry for last year's Oscars for Best International Feature Film. And then a month after that, it withdrew its application, its submission, and the word went public. And that was because of Azerbaijani pressure on Jordan to withdraw the film. So that came to us as a pretty big shock because it was on such a country level. It wasn't just, smaller organizations or spaces. And the reasoning was because it posed a threat to their diplomatic relations between Azerbaijan and Jordan. Nothing more was given to us, no other explanation. So I think as a creative team, to me, that means, the moment, what I witnessed is the moment you try to censor a film, there's even more interest to watch the film. So what we really focused on is, okay, let's find more avenues to show this film beyond just the film festivals. I mean, we traveled across 40 to 50 film festivals all over the world. And then we started an impact campaign through which we shared the films in community spaces, Armenian, non-Armenian, universities, colleges, student spaces, and just wanted to, talk about Vrej, who poses a threat to governments, and to just bring his story to smaller spaces and really reach out to, in a way, not only our tribe, but beyond. And I believe, at the end of the day, we have a very human story in a very political context. Just by me making a film as an Armenian and calling this place Artsakh, it already has a perspective. It already has an angle that I want to share and show and open up dialogue about. And just to censor it is already, silencing potential dialogue to discuss some of these places that continue to be ignored and hidden, and obviously ethnically cleansed with little knowledge about them worldwide. So the journey just became more bigger. We got broadcast opportunities in France, in Germany, in Switzerland. So the film is available to watch for the public there on some of the best broadcast platforms. And now it's on PBS. So I think the silencing was actually, it did more to the film than actually stopping it from being seen.
Thank you. And it is so important to spread the word about the experiences of these, since there is no more political backing or efforts for them to return to their land, and they have been politically dispersed as well as their political views leaders are imprisoned in Baku. So that was just a little bit of the contemporary context that I wanted to give. But with that, I think we can open up for a broader discussion.
I'm Aiden. I think I'll start with a much easier question. During this film, there were several points where the tension was really, the filmmaking tension was really high. What were some points during filming when you felt genuinely like you were in danger, like there was going to be something happening? But I'm glad nothing happened. But when do you feel like where there was going to be some kind of you did it? Woo!
Jen.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think, I think one of the main times is at the return, when I came back with the family after the war, when their village survived and they decided to come back and live again. That whole phase of filming, which I did over multiple trips, always felt like something could happen. It could happen at any time, and it could happen while I'm there, but also, which is what also led me to film as much as I can, because I always knew that maybe once I leave, I'm never going to be let back again.
Yeah, so those roads that you were told not to stop.
Yeah.
What was the reason for those?
Yeah, exactly. So some of them were these roads, and I did this trip with this family and another family through these roads multiple times. So to give you quick context very quickly, I was following two other families as well. At first I wanted to make a film about 3 children. And once the war happened and each family took different decisions, one family didn't survive, the others decided to go back immediately. Vanessa's family waited a little bit and then went. I just knew I could not be everywhere at all times. So I decided to only focus on Vanessa's family. But saying that, I had made some of these return trips with the other families. So I kind of trained myself to these very scary or dangerous moments. But at the same time, I think when I was with Vanessa's family, I had already gone through this, so I expected what I'm going to see. You know, these 7 different checkpoints as we enter with the Russians. I knew that we're going to be stopped there. I knew once we enter these roads, they're going to be dangerous because some of these roads, it was just Azerbaijani tanks, you know, and we just had to go through them. This road with Vanessa, when the Russian says, don't stop, keep going. That day, Vanessa saw a tank through the forest that was an Azerbaijani with a flag. And I wasn't filming at that moment, but so there was constant tensions like that. But I think one of the bigger ones was also being with the children in the forest later, you know, with the mines, the potential of mines being around the land. And just for some reason, I just trusted these kids and trusted that this is their own backyard and they know it by heart. So I'm just gonna go with them, even though the land had changed and it was new to them as well. I mean, you see Valer saying, there's a missile here, but he says it in such coolness, like, there's a missile here, just careful, it hasn't been, it's still there. I'm like, okay, let's go, let's keep going, you know. And then one of the nights, like I was filming, the next day I left Artsakh. That day there was a big attack that happened in one of the smaller airports by Martagert, the region that I was filming in. And that was the road I took, like the day before that attack happened. So the danger was always there, and I knew it was always there, but I had already created such a strong bond with the family that my safety and my feeling of safety came from trusting them and them trusting me. And that's what kept me going.
When he picked up the jacket in the trench, what was he thinking?
So yeah, I mean, they picked up the jacket, and another point is the camera
the distance I have between me and the kids was always a camera. And I think it allowed me to just like step a bit back and experience things through the lens and not necessarily through like being face to face with these realities. It gave me some distance, which I mean, talking about it now, I don't know if it was a good distance or bad. Maybe it was good for my own safety, for my own mental, mental state. But I just felt so in sync with them that there's no moment I was like, you know what, I'm gonna let them go. I'm gonna go because I'm not feeling safe here. I will, on the other hand, I'll be like, guys, boys, kids, is it safe here? They're like, oh, come, it's okay, So I'll just follow the flow. That's how it went.
Hi, my name is Max Martin. You spoke about how you drew on your Armenian heritage as a motivation in making this film, and also about how you initially wanted to follow 3 sets of families. And so I was just wondering, how does the film, as it was made, differ from your initial ideas or concept?
Thank you. That's such a great question. I think the initial concept to bring attention to this place from a perspective of a child was always there. It's how I accessed the place. I entered Artsakh and I only wanted to meet the children. I would sit with the elderly or the mothers and the fathers, and they would tell me about their history from the 90s, and I'll be like, great context, but I want to see the children. I want to follow the children. I want to live the day in and out with them. And I think that never changed. What changed is the content, I think at the start it was just going to be very observational flow film that just is vignettes of pieces of Artsakh and how life happens and how Artsakh builds and creates and shapes its children. And I think what ended up happening is something more situational and urgent with this child. I have footage to make 2 other films about the 2 other families, but eventually I think to dive really deep and tell the story in a very holistic way, I decided that telling it from one perspective and seeing the family dynamics, seeing him through his school, seeing him through his grandparent, grandmother, father, that gave a much deeper dive and investment to continue to try to understand this one kid's life. But I think the vision in a way was always in line to just go low and follow the kids, on their eye level.
Okay, sure.
Hey, one of the questions I have is I've heard that there's a relationship with Iran and Armenia. It's kind of hard now, but once the conflict starts to like go down a little bit, have you guys thought about sharing this video to parts of Iran or other countries that have conflict so you can like relate that to like what they're going through within their own country?
The film was actually played in a festival in Iran.
Okay.
It was they invited the film, they showed it. We didn't have much interaction after that about how the film was perceived.
Okay.
But to me, I think this film it could be relatable not to only countries that have a direct relationship with Iran, with Armenia, but to countries that are going through wars, conflicts, to countries that are maybe not necessarily under attack and fire right now, but are under, regions that are constantly affected by these wars. I showed the film in the country I was born in Jordan, and Jordan doesn't have an active war, but it's the hub where, you know, Syrian refugees, Palestinian refugees, Lebanese, Iraqis, it has accepted them, it has become home for them. And the mostly Arab audience that came and watched the film were like, this is the story of our children. You know, we've gone through similar things. This is how our children are living in the region. And it raises a bigger question of what are we doing as bigger societies to protect these children from these uncertain and these horrific like futures that could await them. So with Iran-Armenia relations, I think it's relative. It's Iranian children now experiencing similar realities, you know, as the war goes on and on. So it's a universal story of any child.
Was there any attempt from the family to censor footage? And then the follow-up question about what seems to be a missing mother. The grandparents are very present, but the mother is not.
Yeah, thank you. I think in terms of the family itself, I think in my own ways of making films and really focusing on trust as the main anchor point for all of us. You know, I was telling, this is a story we're gonna tell. Not I'm telling about you. This is our story. And with that, I was very conscious, like very aware of what I should be filming, when I should not be filming. So I did not want to reach a point where grandma says, let me see what we filmed. Why did you film this scene? I think we had created such great relationship and trust and intimacy that me turning the camera on already implies that this is all comfortable to be filmed. And I always promise them that whatever I do, I'm going to show them the film later. Obviously, I was not showing them raw footage or scenes because then it takes a lot of explanation to, you know, how I'm going to edit it and how it's going to be in context. And that kind of did not fully register for them because they haven't seen documentaries in this style, which is very, you know, coming of age, observational, no voiceovers, no one trying to explain things. So that happened when, at the end, when I closed up the film and I asked them for permission. You know, can I move with this? And they did give me the permission. But one thing actually is the father, Varej's father, in the very start, he was very open to tell his story and to film. Once he went to the war and came back, he did not want to be filmed. One day he even told me, your camera looks like a gun. I don't want to be around it. And once I heard that, I was very, very careful of when I turn the camera out. If he's around, I would just keep low, you know, not film. And then over the years, like once 2023 hit and I was there, he was more open to be filmed. And now, whenever I see him, he's like, because in Artsakhi language, there's a word that says bola. Bola means stop it, enough. And he would be like, Sareen, bola, like stop filming, you know, you're filming everything. And now he's like, I wish I never told you bola because we lost it all and everything you have is my home. So it's a relationship, you know, it's not like I'm taking something from you to show it without your approval. It's you cultivate it. So it becomes, to me, it's life, you know. And in terms of, I think your second part of the question was the mother. No, the mother is that kind of a person, you know. She was in the background trying to make things seem like safe and stable, and you see it in her eyes. I mean, I saw it in her eyes when I was filming, but that was it. To me, it's just these tiny moments that I was able to capture with her expressions were worth so many more scenes with her. And it's because she was just making sure the kids feel like life is going on, you know, normal.
So, Sareen, can you say something about how it came to be there was an ethnically Armenian enclave in Azerbaijan. You want to speak to that?
I think Dzovinar can sort of have a historical view on that. I think she will be more. You have the right language to describe it. I've also done it many times. Exactly. So I've taught a seminar on this particular issue, and I think the best way to understand it is that the Caucasus was an extremely ethnically mixed region before we had all these three nation states that are largely ethnically homogeneous now, and Artsakh is situated on a very mountainous range, as you see. And the population on the mountain area was a majority Armenian, but and Armenians were usually occupied with agriculture, whereas the Muslims living around the mountainous area in the flatland were generally pastoralists. And the two communities relied on each other. But when the Russian Empire collapsed, and they moved out of the region for a few years, the Azerbaijanis, Georgians, and Armenians wanted to create their own independent states. And this is where the conflict over territories in the region began. And this is where we have the first Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. And the issue was always because the territories were to be divided based on demographics, the majority Muslim population in the middle of Nagorno-Karabakh and what is now Republic of Armenia created a problem as we would get control of the territory. Artsakh is more accessible to Azerbaijan by land than Armenia. You've seen the road, 8-hour road that leads. So the economic contacts were always stronger with the East than the West. And it became that when the Bolsheviks took over the region, in order to mediate the situation, they came up with the autonomous Republic of Nagorno-Karabakh, medium, whereby Karabakh was going to be part of the Republic of Azerbaijan, but have a separate a government within Artsakh, and that's how politically it became, and it gained the name Nagorno, Mountainous Karabakh, in the Soviet era.
I'm Knox. I was wondering at the end when Greg asked you if he was going to live or die, how did you respond to that moment?
So I knew that every time we go to this mountaintop, me and him, we always had these reflections or talks, and he knew it's like the time where I can sit and talk to Sareen about things that I don't necessarily talk to her about when my friends are around, you know. And I was already editing the footage, and I also knew that I had no end to the film. And like I didn't know where the film is going, how it's gonna end. And then we were up there talking, and out of nowhere, and I was at a distance, as you can see, filming, and he asked the question, and I didn't answer. I was crying, because I was not expecting it at all, and you know, gave it its time. I absorbed it. He did his own monologue, and then just to change it up, I told him we had a game where we would bet how many minutes it's gonna take us to walk down to his house, and I just played that game with him. You know, we did a bet how long, because it was heavy for me, and I didn't have answers for him, and I right away in my body I felt like this is the ending to his story. He wanted to also end it with the film. You know, he was already growing up and not as the 11-year-old Varej who wanted to run around looking at the camera. So in a way, it was a way for him to say, okay, I think we have to conclude this. How do you see it ending? What's going to happen to me? And it's brought me to conclusions in many ways. One, towards the film. Two, knowing that this would be the end of the film. And I had no answers for him. I left it for all of us to answer him.
My name is Kaya, and I was just wondering, you mentioned that you wouldn't show them the raw footage before you finished editing the film. Have you, or would you show them the raw footage now that time has passed?
Of course. Yeah, I think not showing them the raw footage earlier is just because I knew that certain things they might analyze certain things much larger than what my intentions are with the footage. So I wanted to wait until the cut was done. Like, I knew one day they were packing and I was filming and there was like broken wood in my shot, and his dad saw the shot from my camera and he said, "Why are you filming this broken stuff? That's not nice, you know." And I was like, it's part of my shot. I'm never like, it will never make it in the edit. It's just capturing and gathering footage. So I knew at that point raw footage might start making them think much larger than my intentions. But now I promised them, you know, there's all these legalities with like who owns the footage and all that. But it's a lot of footage, but I want to make low res, like lower, like not high gigabytes of footage, but like a good copy of footage and make sure they have access to it because it's their own home, you know.
Aaron, I was wondering, I noticed at the end that I don't really know if this is like a cultural thing or if it's just different in different places, but I noticed he said that in most stories the hero dies at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And that confused me a bit because at least in the stories that I grew up hearing, right, the hero usually, you know, triumphs in the end.
Mm-hmm.
So wondering, is that a product of the story he's lived? Is that just like are stories different in different places like that? I don't know.
Very, very beautiful question. I've toured with this film for 1.5 years, and I love your question so much. I think there's a large portion of it is cultural. In a lot of the eastern side of the world, the heroes usually sacrifice and die so that the nation can live. You know, there's this kind of even the myth, the Armenian myth, and stories that we've lived in, even in the Middle Eastern culture that I come from. There's always the sacrifice of the hero so that the rest can live in light. You know, I think the Western is a very different look, where the hero is always the one who survives and becomes the hero. So there's a big cultural difference in this, and I think the story originating from this region already gives you the perspective of where the region lies and what heroism means, but also very much from a product of where he lives, because growing up in a family where they call his uncle a hero, who lived and who died in the 90s war, in the 1888 to 1994 is the first war of Karabakh that happened 1988 to 1994, the war of Artsakh. His uncle died during that war, and his uncle is considered to be the hero of the town. There's a school under his name. The grandmother talks daily about, you know, her heroic brother. So yeah, he grew up in a culture where every hero that he knows, every hero that their pictures are hung on the walls in the school, have died for the land. So that is totally his perspective, which is very different, I think, than the Western hero. So yeah.
My name is Barbara. That is louder than I thought. As we look years later with the descendants of Holocaust survivors, we've been exploring how trauma is passed generation to generation. And I'm also very aware of the younger members of his family who were there, probably not able to articulate yet what their experiences were. And I'm wondering whether there have been any attempts to look at the impact of these children and what will happen when they start having families as well, how that trauma is transmitted generation to generation.
Thank you for this question. I think the topic of trauma and the generational trauma is one of the main reasons why I wanted to also explore the story of Artsakh and to tell the story of Artsakh, because I had just come out of working with veterans who were using art and poetry to process, and I knew that generational trauma in this region has it passes differently and it lands differently because it's generational. It's not necessarily spoken of, but it's felt. It's in every story. It's in every, act of survival. And one of the biggest impact goals for me is to bring this about and talk about this trauma and how these children are going to process it going forward. And I think in Armenia, a big question was what kind of programs are handling, what kind of conversations are we having with these children, because children are also, they adapt pretty quickly. I mean, Varej's brother and sister are young. Their way of envisioning and seeing what happened to them is more, it was more like short term. Like Varej's brother Arman was just seeing images. Remember the fire? Remember this is good, this is bad. So these feelings have not fully processed. And then he's now in Armenia in displacement, building a life again. But what are we doing with these inherited dark moments? And it's a question that I'm posing, and it's the question that I think we're looking at what kind of organizations are doing what kind of work with these children to allow them to process, talk about it, to heal, so it becomes constructive in the future rather than destructive in any way. I think the fact that this film is traveling and is being talked about, and for Varej himself and his family, is a way of processing everything that they've gone through. To be able to talk about it, his father and him, they came to France with me, and they were shocked to see hundreds of people going into the cinemas to watch their story. So that is already starting to unlock some of these, I think, complex emotions that they have. But that's not only Varej and his father, right? It's a whole generation. And the big question is, the art, the film is a vehicle to allow for some of these organizations to actually work towards healing for these children.
It would be important to see the sequel,
Yeah.
to see where these people are in their new environment and how they're coping, and how they're coping generationally as well.
Yeah, and I think it's easy to ignore because the world is going by so fast. There's one conflict after another. The region is bombarded by all these conflicts. It's very easy to forget these children because they're children. They're going back to schools, they're having new friends, they're living life again, But to really bring focus on how to, take them, embrace them, and make sure that they're healing from these fears, Angelica, his sister, I was talking to her one day and she said, I'm really scared they're gonna come and break into our house and kidnap me. A 10-year-old is saying that, then imagine what's going on in her head, So I think it's this film is a tool to allow for more spaces to be built for healing.
Hi, I'm Daisy. Thank you guys for being here. So you mentioned that you've worked with veterans who've used art and poetry for their PTSD and trauma. And I am interested in knowing a little bit more about the music that was composed in the film. Because personally, I love music. I'm passionate about music, and I use it as a vehicle of healing for myself. So I noticed that the composer Tigran Hamasyan, yes, he composed the music for the film, and I just wanted to know how was that experience for you working with him to use the sounds to capture the psychological elements of psychological state of a child under the threat of war and violence and fear.
Thank you for this question. So Dikran Hamasyan is actually a famous jazz musician, worldly known. So his tunes I've known about his music for a very long time. And when I was filming, the only music I could see and hear while I was filming was his music and his sensibility that I loved so much in his work. So I wanted to try and see if he'd be open to work with us. And he doesn't compose music for films that often. We reached out to him. He showed interest. I shared the footage with him. And then the conversation started, and it was so important. It was a direct check for me, because he felt extremely connected with, he grew up in Armenia. And he's from Gyumri, which is a town that experienced a large earthquake in the early 90s. And his family left after the earthquake, a large majority, like how many? 20,000 died. So he's very big. Yes, big number for Armenia. So he's Armenian. He's part of the history. The Artsakh story is so close to him. So he felt directly connected to write music for this. And it brought something new and healing for him as he was composing. And a big part of it was also that he really appreciated the silence in the film. He really appreciated the sound design in the film, because it was important for us to keep, the basic sounds of the kitchen, the cooking, the garden, the cows. This is life in Artsakh, and this is the music of the land, So he really focused on that and appreciated that, and did not try to cover any of that with, emotional music that will tell you how to feel. But integrated his music to kind of live within the lines of the sounds of the place. And I really, really appreciated that in our relationship working together. It was a lot of just sending scenes, having a conversation. Do you think music fits here or not? Seeing the scenes, kind of couple of scenes together, feeling out the space and the rhythm of the piece without music, and then writing the music very much extracted from the sounds of the place. And I have to also mention that my editor, who's French, was also so focused on editing this film for sound, making sure the sound is so true as much as, the image. And I think by putting so much focus on the real sounds, the music came naturally and filmed in the right places without over imposing on the whole piece. Beautiful.